Hello and welcome to this edition of Global Voices Insights, where we explore the stories, perspectives, and complexities behind the issues we cover. Thanks for joining us live on YouTube and other platforms. And hello as well to those watching the recording later. Um, Apologize for a bit of delay because one of our guests is having some difficulties in joining, but I hope he'll join uh, soon. And before we begin, please remember that you can share your comments and post questions for our panelists anytime, and we'll address them towards the end of the program. So, my name is Rezman. I am the regional editor for South Asia for Global Voices. I would like to introduce our first panelist for today from Nepal. Uh, she is Sonia Awale, the editor at Nepali Times. She has covered health, science, and environment topics in that news outlet. She holds a degree in public health and a master's in journalism from the University of Hong Kong. We have another guest, we'll introduce him later. And also with us, we have Sydney Allen, our climate justice editor. And before we begin, let me tell you about the Global Voices Climate Justice Fellowship. It was launched in 2024, responding to the growing links between China's overseas footprint and climate impacts in the global south. It brings together independent Sinophone journalists with reporters from South Asia, Southeast and Central Asia, and Francophone Africa to investigate how Chinese finance, technology, and policies affect local climate justice struggles. So these each cycle scheduled to run for 10 months. The first cohort started in March 2024 and ended last year, and the second started early 2025. And Sonia is one of the fellows of the 2025 cohort. So in today's episode, we'll be diving into China's influence and green investments in South Asia. It's a region often shaped by India's historic influence, but it's now at the center of Beijing's growing soft power efforts. So let us hear from Sonia, uh, who wrote a story in collaboration with Kian San. It's called Water Wars and Hydro Hegemony in South Asia. This article talks about China's announcement of building the world's largest dam on Brahmaputra River and its impact. In the article, Sonia explored China's use of different tactics to shape public opinion to establish a clear narrative on a given topic and then amplify it through a coordinated online ecosystem. So, Sonia, how is China shaping the narratives of hegemony? You're muted.
Thank you so much, Rizwan, and for giving me this platform to share some of our learnings during this fellowship. I do want to start off by saying that I think my Chinese journalist partner, who is working on this story, she really has a good, she was really important while bringing out the Chinese narrative because I think all of us have this faced at one point or the other. We're not as it's not as easy to get China's perspective. So she was really helpful in getting that. So I really miss. I think she probably should have also been in this panel. Nonetheless, I do want to talk a little bit about before getting into whole how China is influencing the reason through infrastructure, particularly at this point hydropower. I do want to talk about a little bit about this you know this dam in Brahmaputra. I think at this point, by the point or when we did that story, like most publication had already had then they had already had done the stories and it was in the news and it was being the biggest hydropower dam and Chinese at that. Of course, it did garner the attention that it did. So it was, I guess, in many ways helpful for us to, already have that perspective from everyone, particularly India and Bangladesh, who had opposed to the project. But this also got us thinking what remains to be said or written, right? Because it looked like everyone was already writing everything they possibly could, but also look at it from a very neutral perspective, not so much from India or Bangladesh or even from China, but from Nepal and the experts we spoke to for the story, and specifically technical experts and engineers. And what they told, I thought, was very interesting, that this is not exactly a dam project as it was first publicized, but it's more of a run of river, which means uh, that it might not alter what we're calling, might alter the river flow or the kind of downstream impact that we've been writing about or projecting, or what's out there, especially in Indian media, and to a certain extent in Bangladesh too. So that changes the whole narrative, and maybe, there is a bit of an exaggeration in terms of the possible ecological, hydrological impacts. And perhaps it is more about the security, um, or the how. And I think India has been very also forthcoming about how they perceive this project as a security threat. So I think we try to bring all of those narratives. Of course, there is also persistent or narrative about how China has been using all of this different project, hydropower included, as one of the, like sort of like a soft power. There are definitely, but that I think has more to do with other infrastructure. But this being in there within their own territory, so I think what I'm trying to say is that I think much of the talk about how this project might impact downstream or might impact downstream community um, might be a bit of an exaggeration. And at this point, with India already having also announced their own dam project, I think that is going to be more of a, at least for India at this moment, at this point in time, that is going to be more of a priority, in that there is already local opposition to the proposed dam in Assam. So for India, that might take more of a priority at this point. How do you manage? How do you try to tackle the local opposition and also try to go ahead with this? Um, so I I think that will take precedence, I think. But having said that, I think trans-Himalayan projects need to go ahead with the cooperation with all of these countries together, especially when we bring in the climate change impact into context. So I think this is more of a geopolitics really at the end of the day, more than hydrology or ecology. Of course, there are ecological aspects to this, but I felt as I was doing the story and I was talking with the experts, it was more of a hydropolitical, sorry, not, I mean, I guess you could even call it hydropolitics at this point, but more of a geopolitics. And that is something we, country like Nepal, and I'm sure Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, all of us were feeling this when you have these two big countries, big economies, and you're sandwiched right between them, and they're competing with each other. And yeah, that is something I think naturally that's happening, but it's happening to a much greater extent, and we're all feeling the impact of it at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So yes, we have Kunda Dixit. Please allow me to introduce him. Yeah, so Kunda Dixit is the editor and publisher of Nepali Times and Himal Magazine. He is also the co-publisher of Himal South Asian uh, regional magazine, and he is a graduate of Columbia University School of Journalism, and he teaches at Kathmandu University's media department. So welcome, Kunda.
Thank you.
So
I think I'm muted.
oh,
No, you. We can hear you.
You can hear me?
we can
Okay.
hear.
All right. Okay,
Okay.
great. Sorry about the technical hitch. I finally got through on my iPhone. I'm not very tech savvy. So can you see me? Can you hear me? Everything
Yeah.
fine?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay,
Thank
glad
you.
to be here.
Hope,
Okay.
Yes, thank you. So we move on. So Sonia, I would like you to hear from you a bit more about that article. I mean, how did that collaboration uh, happen? I mean, why did you decide to collaborate with your co-writer, and what did you learn in this collaboration?
Um, so collaboration. I mean, I was fortunate to have received this fellowship. That the core of this fellowship being that a sign of some journalists and journalists from other part of the world. In my case, this was South Asia. So that as a core, this was very that's essentially how it began, and we were working on stories about how China. Various projects that China has been doing around the world, including in South Asia, how it is in good or bad way is affecting or having it, or looking at from climate justice angle. But for me, it was a very new experience, co-writing, of course, but also with a Chinese journalist too, largely, and it was a very interesting learning experience because again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't really get, more often than not, we don't really get to hear China's perspective as much. It's not as easy to access, uh, to get in touch with Chinese officials or even experts. More often than not, it's what the media has, state media or what on their various different social platforms have put it out there, and even that is quite difficult for international journalists. I think first you don't have language, and then you don't have kind of access or ease of doing things. So in that sense, it was a first for me, and also working with my Chinese partner Sun Tian, um, also learning from her not just the different aspects that she was able to gather, but also how you go about gathering these things and what are the there are different categories. I think like state media, so that's more or less what the state is saying, and then you also have independent thinkers, then you have think tanks, so where to go for what kind of information, and who are like best sources for certain kind of information that you need. During our workshop, which happened in Kathmandu, I think that was one of the areas or one of the discussions we had, how to better get China's perspective on various different issues, when it's not really easy to end, because more often than not, I think there's a lot of miscommunication happening too, or not as much information that's very forthcoming, and that has also led to a lot of you know um, I wouldn't say I mean just to give an example with these with the dam on Brahmaputra, I think there was not as much information from the Chinese side in the beginning, so which also led to a little bit of misinformation about how this is, the largest dam, and we were not really talking about how this is actually Runoff River project. So getting information, but also where to get the kind of information you want. I think that was very crucial, something I learned from her, and overally when I was doing the story. So I think that is definitely, it will stay with me, and especially as in this region, this China's involvement and then geopolitics is such a big part of our writing and reporting. So that has become a really important learning that that will help me in reporting further down the line too.
Yes, so it's a real example of how co-writing surfaces nuances that only one author might miss from one country, the perspectives of different countries, and especially, to get the Chinese perspectives, you need to learn the language because many of these informations are in Chinese. So, and you need to know where are those. So before we go to Kunda, I would like to hear from Sydney about the climate justice project. I mean, uh, uh, in this year, how many uh, articles were published, and what do you plan more? Um, so that's what we want to hear.
Sure. So, first of all, thank you for letting me join Rezwan and chat about this a little bit. So this year we have 8 climate justice fellows, 4 from Sinophone regions, and the other 4 are Sonia from Nepal, and then we have people in Central Asia, Indonesia, and Togo in Africa. So, very spread out, obviously. And just to reiterate what Sonia was saying, even the language aspect alone, having people who can read in the different local languages and then also read in Chinese and bring their different perspectives, it's been fascinating as an editor to get to see just the really creative, interesting sources that people can find and the information that we're bringing together through this project, the different perspectives that, it would be impossible really for someone to find the exact same comic strip on Weibo, for instance, that some of our Sinophone fellows have found. It's just not something that is very accessible to journalists outside the region. So as an editor, it's been a privilege to get to see these folks work together, to get to see the amazing articles they've come up with, and support them along the way as much as I can.
Okay, thank you. So we now we talk about China's growing footprint in this region, from major infrastructure investments to sustainable energy products. China is reshaping Nepal, Bangladesh, and beyond. But what does this mean for local communities, livelihoods, and the environment? And Nepal is often at the heart of this debate because it's squished between giant neighbors, India and China, and is also trying to balance its relationships with the US. To unpack all this, Kunda, let's turn to you. When we talk about China's growing presence in South Asia, what kind of projects, dams, power plants, roads are we really talking about?
Well, China has got Nepal in the whole BRI scheme and has built a major airport in Pokhara, the second largest city. It has bid and won contracts from the ADB and other international lenders to build hydropower plants, as well as investors to build hydropower plants, and as a grant has been building highways and in Nepal since the 60s. So Chinese involvement is as long as the 70 years that Nepal and China have had diplomatic relations. And as you said, it's a very delicate balance between India and China. We're squeezed in between them. The trouble is that whenever China and India are fighting, and they've had wars before, Nepal suffers. But when they get together, we suffer as well. And the most recent example of this is there's an area about 270 square kilometers in northwestern Nepal, in the Himalaya, which is in the tri-junction of the China-India-Nepal borders. And since the British days, Nepal has claimed that to be its own. But after the British left India, India has sort of said that that is actually theirs. And just this week, last week, Indian and Chinese officials met and decided to open trade between Tibet and India. But one of those trading points, actually checkpoints, goes through this disputed territory, which is claimed by Nepal. So you see that even when China and India get together, it's they don't really care about this small, tiny little neighbor on in between them. So yeah, I mean it's and the whole investment in hydropower, especially and aviation, has been a problem for India. So India, for example, has refused flights to Pokhara, which is built by the Chinese, from Indian cities. So even if Indian airlines want to fly to Pokhara, they can't. The government doesn't give them permission. And India has also refused to buy hydropower, surplus hydroelectricity from Nepal, from plants that have been built or have Chinese equipment in them. So this really puts like 1/3 of our hydro generation capacity not being eligible for export to India. So there is a direct impact of this geopolitical tension between the two neighbors, despite the fact that they come together sometimes on Nepal. And so it's an extremely delicate balance that we've been dealing with for the last 250 years, since we're the oldest nation state in South Asia. But now, with this added new picture of Trump and falling out with India, and India getting closer to China, this all is sort of making it all very much more messed up.
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry, that was a long answer to your question.
No, it's okay. That's quite interesting. So, how visible are these projects in the daily lives of people in Nepal? For example, like it's in the state level, like all this diplomacy and politicking is going on, but how people are reaping benefit, or like, are they economically benefited? Are there more jobs, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's very visible. Pokhara Airport is very visible. Everyone knows the Chinese built it, although we built it with a loan from the Chinese, with a very high interest rate. But then they know that it's a Chinese airport. In the 60s and 70s, China built the road between Lhasa and Kathmandu. Everyone knows the Chinese built it, and it was only the second highway in Nepal. So China has very good soft power in Nepal. And part of the reason for that is that since we are so economically and politically dependent on India, Nepali politicians, governments tend to lean over backwards to be friendlier to China, just to balance off India's overwhelming gravitational pull. So, and the visibility part, I think they're definitely, if it is a grant project like the highways that were built, Nepal benefited enormously. It is because of these highways that subsequent hydropower plants were accessible enough to be built. So the infrastructure, especially the help that China has given on infrastructure, has been immensely useful for Nepal's economy, as well as the daily lives of Nepalis. Yeah. But this is not to say that India hasn't built highways as well, and those are also very useful. And in fact, our past rulers in the past 30 years have actually played India off against China to sort of compete for more visible projects in Nepal.
Okay, interesting. And also, I'd like to know how kind of China broke into of all these infrastructure projects. Like, for example, BRI. Since 2016, China has invested heavily in Bangladesh on BRI projects. So I would like to know about BRI projects in Nepal. For Sonia, you can answer, and how they're faring. I mean, is it going as per plan, or is there a setback, or
So BRI, I mean, the most recent update when our Prime Minister KP Oli, he was in China last. I forget when exactly it was, but earlier this year, and I think a lot of that meeting, or as the meeting was concluding, if BRI, or what are the projects that would be under BRI, I think that made a whole bunch of news, and very much tied with BRIs was also how this narrative of debt trap with China. So how are we going to handle the entire deal? I think that has been a big a discourse in
Yeah.
Nepal. But I think very specifically, I think there are projects listed under BRI, but I think Mr. Dixit would have more
Yeah, actually,
specific projects that we have.
sorry, Sonia, Rezwan. Sonia, I think, remember we talked about this, that Pokhara Airport, when it was built, when the agreement was first signed for the loan with China Exim Bank, it was 2014, right? So
Before
it was
BRI.
before BRI, and it actually became quite a tension between Nepal and China when the Chinese ambassador in Kathmandu said that retroactively Pokhara was a BRI project, and Nepal said no, 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 it's not BRI because there was no BRI then. BRI is taken as an extension of Chinese power in the region. And in fact, the Americans have reacted to it. The American reaction to BRI has been the MCC project, which you might have heard about. It's a $500 million grant from the US government to build transmission lines and upgrade highways in central Nepal. And that's seen as China-US rivalry playing out in Nepal. So not just China-India, but China-US as well. So you have BRI on one hand, you have MCC, which is the Americans, and then you have the Indians also playing. Now, MCC was very interesting. I might just add that when Trump came in, it was actually announced that MCC may actually be canceled because USAID was being canceled all over. But somehow, 3 weeks ago, we finally got word from Washington that the MCC project was going ahead. So this was very interesting, and I probably linked to geopolitics because if China was trying to make inroads into Nepal with BRI, the Americans would have liked to keep the MCC as a response, and they have.
Yeah, I read somewhere that Beijing offered military cooperation in Kathmandu. It might have triggered many alarms in India and also in the US. So possibly they are trying
the Nepal army is actually quite neutral, and they do have joint exercises with the Indian Army, the Chinese PLA, the US Army. In fact, our Chief of Army Staff is in Beijing, is in China as we speak, to talk about joint exercises. So on that score, I wouldn't be that worried, and I don't think geopolitics gets into that too much because we make sure that all three of the powers are balanced. Yeah.
Thank you. So we are receiving comments, questions in YouTube. Please do send us questions, and we'll answer them later. We'll ask the panelists about them. So please keep them coming. So another question is that how do large infrastructure projects interact with traditional ways of living or cultural landscapes? Like are these big mega dam projects or bridges are hampering the local villages or the communities? So is there a sort of worry or concern from those communities, or it's just unilateral by the government and they're deciding and they're not thinking? Or is there a plan? Are they going like according to a, say, 5-year plan, and then they're asking for investments and other things? Yeah, Kunal, please.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, these mega projects on rivers are definitely very, very disruptive on ecosystems, on indigenous land, on local livelihoods. You're talking about submergence of large tracts of land where there's farms or settlements or whatever. And our record on resettlement as well as compensation is not very good. Neither is it in the rest of South Asia, I might add. But so it's obvious that, when you have mega projects, there's going to be. But, the interesting thing is that we haven't yet started building in a large way reservoir projects in Nepal. We only have one reservoir project and another one is under construction. Now, Sonia, you might want to add about the visit you made to Tanahu, which is the other project that's coming up. And there in Tanahu, there's actually local opposition where the villagers that were displaced by the dam have said that they've not got adequate compensation. But this is the usual story, because it's the same with earthquake relief, where people who lost their homes and villages during the earthquake were not compensated enough. So it's a basic dysfunction in governance, in ensuring that the social safety net is intact. And there, I think all our governments have failed quite miserably. So Sonia, you might want to add about Tanahu, where you went to visit that dam site.
Tonahu is only the second reservoir project in Nepal, and this is 40 years after the first one was built in 1984 or something like that. And yet, this is still not a big enough reservoir. I believe, if I'm not wrong, it has only 21-day storage capacity, so it's not even fully a reservoir. It's still run of river, with a reservoir being a small part of it. Nearly complete, I believe. Sometime next year is finally when it's being unveiled. So yes, one part of the story there definitely is resettlement, but and I think Tanahu, there's not much to say except that there are still communities who have not gotten compensation. But I think another interesting example of displacement is Budi Gandaki, if I may add that one. That's
Yeah.
we planned Budi Gandaki, I don't know, 20 years ago. It's been a while. So, and I believe the settlements or communities who were in the region, they have all been, in fact, compensated in one way or the other, or at least that's last I know of it. But the problem with that is it's been 20 years since the project was planned. So while communities have also been resettled elsewhere, but the project itself hasn't moved along at all. Of course, it's a very expensive project. And again, now after so many years, a lot of the engineering aspect as well as capacity, everything included. I think it needs to be now updated, and with the climate change being one of the driving forces, I think the project itself needs to be updated. But I think Budi Gandaki was a flourishing town, and it still is. But I think that also is an example of how, resettlement in an event of a big project is still remains a concern in countries like Nepal and elsewhere in South Asia. But also, I think I might also want to add, although they might not be considered really large infrastructure, but most highways and road infrastructure in Nepal, you also see this conflicting narrative where local communities actually want them. More often than not, it's the other way around, where experts from elsewhere need to intervene, like looking at all the different sites, including ecology, because in remote parts of the country, especially up in the high mountains, they want roads, because roads for them equates access and development. So roads in Nepal, they have always been, like synonymous to development. So people actually want roads, sometimes even at the expense of nature and even heritage, because in places in the Trans-Himalaya, like Dolpo, which is it's a very scenic, beautiful uh, town high up in the mountain, uh, culturally more Tibetan than Nepal, and it's one of those places where I mean, like, how do I put it? Very scenic, but very difficult to reach. So, tourism does, tourists are really looking out for those kind of destinations. But also to ease tourism at the same time, they are now building trekking trails, which sometimes do not respect what is traditionally, culturally used to be their way of life and livelihood. So I think two things are happening at the same time.
Yes. Also, I can talk about an experience from Bangladesh. Is that, like, not all projects are, China sponsored, like China wholly paid by China, and there are also certain government projects where we see that Chinese contractors are building those, and like we used to see Indian contractor, Indian suppliers working on those projects, but nowadays we see more and more uh, companies from China doing it. And from the reports I saw that, like, because they have developed they experience like how to get a project in our country. Our societies are not, there are corruption and there are other, influencing people, politics, using politics. So they have uh, gotten the hang of it. Like then the more and more Chinese companies are getting this contract. So do you see such things in Nepal? Maybe Kunda can answer.
I think
Do you see like,
that was true for the last maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But
Mhm,
because of this Indian sensitivity to Chinese involvement in infrastructure, especially hydropower,
mhm,
uh, Chinese investments in hydropower projects in Nepal in the past 2 or 3 years have actually been cancelled uh, because Nepal government has been responding to this Indian sensitivity. Chinese contractors, even though they may be the cheapest, because the Nepal government knows that we cannot sell that power to India if there's a surplus, would be hesitant to allow a Chinese investor, even if they're cheaper than the others. But I think we must add that the reason some of these projects have been affordable in the last 20 years, especially hydropower, has been because the Chinese have built it so cheaply, right? And they may have, greased some palms and to get the contract in the past, but they have come out to be much cheaper than European or other contractors. And it's very interesting that even in projects that India is building in Nepal, there would be Chinese equipment and Chinese involvement somehow, because if you procure globally, then the cheapest equipment is from right next door in China.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think it's a bit you're using double standards. If Chinese are allowed to build factories and invest in India, but then India has problems when they do it in Nepal. It's a bit hypocritical.
Yeah, true. And on this subject, I would like to highlight another article from the Climate Justice Project. So, the China's push into Nepal's electric vehicle sector. So,
Mm,
our article called China's Vested Interest in Electrifying Public Transport in Nepal digs into that. EV car registration, you see, especially in European countries, is exceeding 50%, and for example, in Norway, 96%. And Nepal is well ahead in South Asia in this regard. Like new EV cars are registered in last year. So, uh, can you tell me what are the tensions here? Is this a good thing, or do you think that China has made in Nepal a showcase of all these EV vehicles?
well, there are electric vehicles from India also running around in Nepal's roads, and they were more dominant till 3 years ago. But there's been a sudden rise in Chinese models that have come into Nepal, just because there's been an explosion of EV vehicle technology in China, and mainly for export. So it's not just Nepal, worldwide. You look at Brazil, you look at Mexico, you look at European countries, you look at Thailand. Chinese EVs just basically rule everything because they're cheaper. And lately, their technology has also been much more superior to other manufacturers. In Nepal itself, as you mentioned, Rezwan, we are now, last year, the percentage of new cars that were electric, these includes vans, utility cars, as well as private vehicles, was 78%. So 78% of new vehicles on the roads were electric, and this is one of the highest in the world after Norway. And the reason for that is twofold. Till 2 years ago, the range of these electric vehicles was not long enough for long distance vans and cars to ply on highways without recharging. So now with 500-kilometer range, almost everything within Nepal is within range. So a lot of the intercity mini buses are now electric. A lot of the private vehicles are electric. The other reason that there's been this surge in interest in both Indian and Chinese vehicles is that they're much cheaper. And the reason they're much cheaper is because China makes cheaper lithium batteries and cheaper cars. And so I think it's important not to single out Nepal, but this is happening worldwide. Nepal just happens to be next door. And and it became it. I must say the Global Voices article that Sonia wrote about electric vehicles in Nepal was in April, and not many people noticed it. And we've been writing in Nepali Times about electric vehicles in Nepal for the last 15 years, and not many people noticed it either. But until New York Times wrote about it last month, it wasn't widely known as it is now. The way the West looks at it is that China is dumping subsidized electric vehicles into their markets, and therefore they have imposed tariffs. Although I think the Europeans have lifted those tariffs now. But it's seen as a trade war with China, whereas for us, it's mainly about replacing our fossil fuel dependency on the outside world, our fossil imports for diesel, petrol, with something that we have a surplus of, which is clean, green, renewable energy, hydropower. So for Nepal, it's really the future that we have to go electric, and not just with private vehicles and small vans, but also larger buses. And the good news is that I think Nepal this year is importing 100 new large buses, city buses from China, electric ones. And if this trend continues, I think we can really reduce the petroleum import bill, which is now, Sonia, correct me if I'm wrong, but 25% of our total imports is petroleum.
Close to 25, 20, something like that.
Yeah, it makes
But yeah,
sense actually. Yeah, because in Bangladesh there is a debate. So all the rickshaws are now going electric, so they're like battery driven, and so what they do is that they charge at home, and
Yeah.
it is putting a lot of strain on our electricity. Is also we're trying to build the capacity for the whole country, when the demand is a lot higher, and there is not enough production. So in this aspect, I mean, it's more feasible for Nepal to go into EV with
Definitely,
the
definitely,
surplus
definitely. For
electricity.
example, yeah, Rezwan, sorry to interrupt, but for example, India, 80% of India's grid, electrical grid, national grid, is from thermal power plants and coal, right? So even if you have an electric vehicle in India, you're charging it with fossil fuels, by burning fossil fuels. Whereas in Nepal, you have this 100% renewable hydroelectricity, which you are charging, so you're not increasing your carbon footprint. Number two, electric vehicles reduce the air pollution at the street level. So that's a bonus, right? Because Kathmandu is already one of the most polluted cities in the world in winter because of our topography and terrain. And so having more electric vehicles will clean up the air and make people healthier.
Okay. So I'll now address one of the questions from YouTube, and so this is to Sonia. The question asks, could you tell us a bit more about the article you co-wrote, how you picked the topic, and what it was like bringing two perspectives together in one piece?
Sure. I think starting off, we did talk about the dam, the project on. Sorry. So starting off, we did talk about one of the stories we did. So I think I more or less have addressed that. But other stories, of course, the electric buses. Again, Mr. Dixit has more or less addressed that. But I think in terms of like what kind of or how we go about picking topics, I would say we are looking into, of course, China's infrastructure in the region and how this has impacted the country, Nepal, India, and South Asia. both in a good, like look at all of different aspects. So for us, I think again, because of Chinese investment into large infrastructure being one of the focus area, and also how China is in a way, this has been ultimately growing its soft power. So of course, it made sense for us to go into hydropower. And hydropower, when we talk about hydropower, I think there are certain nuances that I think is not really out there for at least international audience. Maybe not so much, and maybe not even South Asia to a large extent. Uh, when we talk about investment into hydropower, China is purely investment into hydropower. But of course, again, India really comes into mix because of how geopolitics has come into play. But for India, it's much more. I think for India, it's even more crucial. Where again, with China, it is purely investment. As we've reported about it. But for India as a downstream country, there are other impact. One being the how the climate change has worsened the scenario such that there is in terms of monsoon or disasters and how that is going to impact a large population, but also at the same time as the demand for water peaks in the next decade or so. So water has become a commodity. So for India, I think its concern is not so much hydropower. Of course, it does want. It does. I think one of India does want to. It does not just want to, but it needs to clean up its energy sources. And Nepal and countries like Nepal and Bhutan can play a big role there. But also at the same time, it does need the kind of need a sort of a safeguard, if you might call them. And I think reservoirs could become, especially to regulate monsoon water flow. But also at the same time, also given water being a commodity, and 70% of water flow into the Ganges is coming from Nepal and beyond Nepal, Tibet. So their focus has been more on controlling water or water bodies in Nepal than hydropower itself. And I think this is now becoming, more and more. This has become, I think, there is more and more discourse. So I think, in a way, in a nutshell, I wanted to bring all of that nuances into the story, that it is not just hydropower investment. We are talking here about hydro, not just hydropower. So I think that's how India becomes a very crucial player here. And even as we're talking about China's investment, we do need to bring India. So that was how the story idea started. And when we talk about hydropower, electric vehicle became, like a sort of a follow up, almost like a continuation of the story. Because in case of Nepal, again, because export potential now is much lower, because India is not buying from most of our hydropower projects which have Chinese involvement. So that meant how can we now best use this surplus now that we have? We spent billions of rupees to generate this power, but then we're wasting it. In fact, we are waste, especially during monsoon when we have enough electricity and we're not using, because we're not first able to export as much. So we need to find industries where we can. And for us, that has one of those hanging fruits is transportation. So that's how whole EV comes into mix. But again, there is a limitation again that while private EV has really taken off, and it's, I guess, at this point can also be considered a success story of sorts from Nepal, but largely this does not really impact electric big buses. And I think climate justice really, I think, comes in there, because most people are using are using public transportation, and that's where real investment needs to be, and that's what really needs to be cleaned up. Not saying that private vehicles do not need to be, but they are happening at a really good pace. But it's just that, how many people can afford electric private vehicle compared to people who really need public transportation? And if that could turn electric. I think that will benefit a lot more people. And also, while we're talking about climate justice, I think electric two-wheelers is what really is another missing, uh, missing link here, because we have at least 1.2 million two-wheelers only in Kathmandu, and that's a very this is a figure from at least a couple of years ago. So, which is to say, I think electric two-wheelers is another segment which is really being overlooked or not, not prioritized as much as. And part of the reason private EV has taken off is the subsidy and a state subsidy in some of these models. I mean, models is not the right word, but we do have categories for different levels of EV. So that's another thing we wanted to talk about in terms of even within electric vehicle category. So that's how that story came about. So it has both good and bad. I think the success story, but at the same time, what's missing here clearly electric buses and then two-wheelers. And then, of course, then I guess the dam in the biggest dam in the world at this point. I think that story was again really important because we really were trying to look into hydrological aspect, ecological, but also again geopolitics. So all of these topics for us, it felt like some of the more interesting and important story ideas sometimes without all the all the nuances or like with so many information still missing. And and having a Chinese reporting partner, she was able to bring the Chinese perspective where it was really important. But also we'll also try to I think address other countries where the story required. And yeah, I guess I hope that answers
Yeah,
your question. Very long
yeah.
answer.
No, no, it's okay. So sticking to this question, I have a brief question to Sydney. So what do you think about the efficacy of this co-writing model, and what are the challenges you faced? So can it be replicated to other newsroom also, like this two-writer model?
So yes, I mean, it's definitely very rewarding in terms of the content that we've gotten out of it, but also I think anytime you're combining two different perspectives, two different writing styles, two different journalistic backgrounds, there are some challenges that can arise. We've had fellows in the past who disagree on the angle of an article or what the kind of underlying message should be. So it's definitely something where there has to be a level of trust, and the co-working process is something that takes work and time, and I'm sure Sonia can speak to that a little bit more, but it's definitely something that I really believe in. I think the co-writing model is fabulous for getting different perspectives and ensuring that people can build a network and build a community for future reporting in different spaces. So I know we had a retreat with our climate justice fellows back in, I believe it was April. And part of that work was assisting each other in building up networks within our own communities for how, in the future when Sonia is reporting on China, maybe she can call on some of the Sinophone fellows for sources, for tips, for suggestions. So the idea here is to not just have a one-off, but build a network with this project and hopefully offering people something they can rely on in the future.
Yeah, thank you. So we can take another question from YouTube. So so is there a difference between how Nepali elites, it can be political or economic, and public opinions, how they view and benefit or are affected by the China's presence? How the elites view China's hegemony, so to speak.
I think the elite would be, which elite you were talking about in Nepal, right? There used to be an elite when we had a monarchy. Now we have democracy. We have a new elite. And more or less, the political parties, the elite in the political parties, are divided by geopolitics. They tend to lean on either the north or the south of Nepal, and that has actually determined a lot of the ways development has taken place in Nepal. Is which party in power leans which way, north or south, and so the people's concerns, the citizens' concerns, always takes a back seat. And this has been actually the curse of most of South Asian countries, is that we just have very governments that are not very accountable to the people's needs on equity, for example, on inclusion, and uh, and 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 if there is a benefit for the local people, it almost tends to be a byproduct of some larger interests at play. And in many cases, is actually there's harm done when we take on very large projects that do not address local concerns.
Mhm. Thank you. And another question from the audience. How is the cultural impact of China in Nepal? There are Nepalese students of Chinese language and culture through the Confucius Institute, like in other countries. So it's a question. Cultural support is present. Maybe Sonia can answer.
Yeah, increasingly so. I would, yes, we have lots, like students going to China, learning Chinese language and going to Chinese university, which has been happening for a while. I wouldn't say that's a recent development, but what is a recent development is that, after the Trump administration and how foreign students have had difficulty getting visa. So that has sort of diverted a lot of students to universities in other parts of the world. And China is definitely one of the countries that now Nepali students are going to. Not only Nepali students, students even from India and other parts of Asia. China has become another, option after the United States. So that that is the most recent development. But I think cultural impact of China, the fact that, I mean, we have been more, I think, compared to China, India, traditionally speaking, historically, we've had, the fact that we understand, at least we understand the language, and we have very similar culture, tradition, especially along the southern plains of the country. You know, like next door, like they're neighbors, and they have their fam they have they have like sons and daughters getting married along just across the border. So all of have contributed to this Nepal China traditional historical relationship. So we've always been more close when you talk about cultural side of things. It's always been India that we've been more culturally close to. I think as for China, I would say Tibet actually, the trade relation, historical trade relation, especially with Tibet. In fact, Kathmandu was, in a way, flourishing as a you could almost call it a center of trade back in the day. So it was more of a trade relation that we had with China. But of course, increasingly with globalization and increasing Chinese presence in Nepal, especially through investment, that has been changing, although not to a point that it can rival what we have with India. Because culturally, again, the language I think definitely is one, and we grew up on very similar. You know, entertainment and other forms, and also the fact that politically also speaking, from the time of Nehru, I think our Nepali leaders, they've been very close with China, with India. With British and India, and with Nepal, our own Rana regime. I think even our democratic movement that happened simultaneously, all adding to the relation that we have. But yes, increasingly, yes, impact of cultural impact, yes, definitely, but also other way around, because I think there have been. I think this is one interesting example of a series that was shot in Pokhara, which is the second largest city in Nepal, and also the touristic, tourist touristic town here. And after following that, and this was before pandemic, there was this huge influx of tourists, Chinese tourists, who were going specifically to Pokhara. And before pandemic, I think China had, if I'm not wrong, finally was the biggest number of foreign visitors we're getting. It used to be India followed by United States, and it was China for the first time. But then the pandemic happened, but again, I think it's also sometimes to a certain extent also on the other side the cultural influence.
Yeah, thank you. We're almost at the top of the hour. Before we close, I'd like to pose a last question to Kunda. So if we talk about climate justice, is China part of the climate solution or part of the problem, or both? How would you answer and why?
I don't think it's a part of the problem at all. For countries like us and around the world, other countries, it is the reason why we've been able to afford green technology. China being the largest exporter now of wind turbines, of photovoltaic cells, of lithium batteries, of electric cars and buses. So anything you name in non-fossil energy, China has taken the lead. And not just taken the lead in terms of exports, but also reduced their cost. If you look at the graph that shows you the reduction of cost in dollar terms of lithium batteries in the last 10 years, or the cost of photovoltaic cells in the last 10 years, if we still depended on German photovoltaics, we would not have been able to afford anything here. So at the moment, we now have nearly 200 megawatts of solar power. Why? Because it's now feasible to install grid-level solar power generators because of cheap Chinese photovoltaics. The West may see Chinese dominance in renewable energy as a threat, as a trade threat, because it does replace their technology. But we don't. I don't think we do, and neither do a lot of the countries in the global south. And being right next door to both India and China, I'm really glad to see that India is also now taking a lead in green technology. We just had a auto car show, our annual car fair, trade fair. And a lot of the Indian manufacturers of charging stations and all were there. And their charging stations will be charging Chinese cars. So what could be more symbolic than India and China coming together? And especially when you look at the reasons behind climate change and carbon dioxide buildup and fossil energy use around the world, then there's no other way than to make renewable energy affordable for countries like ours. That's the only way to go. And the Chinese have done it. And I think because of the competition, Indian manufacturers are also making inroads into electric vehicles, batteries, and they are cooperating with each other. India and China are cooperating with each other in the manufacture of some of these technologies. So we should all reap a benefit from it, I think.
Yes, thank you, Kunda and Sonia, for sharing your thoughts and being here. And today's discussion showed us how issues like energy, water, and transport are not just technical, they carry deep social and geopolitical weight. And if you are new to Global Voices, check out our stories covering events and issues from around the world. We publish in over 30 languages and across different sections. For regular updates, please visit our website to sign up for our daily or weekly newsletter. You can also follow us on Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the show. This has been a Global Voices Insights episode. We'll see you next time. Thank you for being with us.